I pressed my face to the passenger window as we climbed the winding road. Pine trees blurred past, their scent filtering through the vents. Ian's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white against the leather. "You're quiet," I said. He glanced at me, then back at the road. "Just concentrating." The hostel appeared around the next bend, a rustic building perched on the mountainside like something from a postcard. Ian parked near the entrance and grabbed our overnight bag from the trunk. I stretched my legs, breathing in the thin mountain air. "One night," he said, handing me the thermos I'd packed with chamomile tea. "That's all we need." I unscrewed the cap and inhaled the familiar scent. The thermos had traveled with us on every trip for 5 years. A wedding gift from Ian's sister. Reliable, predictable, like our marriage had become. The check-in took minutes. Ian spoke quietly with the clerk while I wandered to the large windows overlooking the valley. Stars were already emerging in the darkening sky. "Room's ready," Ian said, touching my elbow. "But I need to handle something first. Business call that can't wait." I turned to face him. "Here? Tonight?" "Won't take long." He kissed my forehead, a gesture so familiar it felt automatic. "Why don't you enjoy the porch? The view's supposed to be incredible." I watched him disappear down the hallway, already pulling out his phone. The thermos grew warm in my hands as I pushed through the glass doors onto the wooden deck. The porch stretched across the entire front of the hostel, furnished with Adirondack chairs and small tables. I chose a spot at the far end and wrapped myself in the wool blanket I'd found folded on one of the chairs. The fabric smelled like cedar and wood smoke. Stars multiplied overhead as the last daylight faded. I sipped my tea and tried to remember the last time Ian and I had sat together without the television on, without his laptop open between us. Footsteps crossed the wooden planks behind me. I turned to see 2 men approaching, both young, maybe late 20s, with worn backpacks and the easy confidence of people comfortable in the mountains. The taller one had dark hair and a beard that looked deliberately unkempt. His companion was clean-shaven with sandy hair and bright eyes that caught the porch light. "Beautiful night," the bearded one said, stopping a few feet away. "It is." I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. The clean-shaven one stepped closer. "He said you could enjoy the view." Something in his tone made me set down the thermos. "He?" "Your husband. We ran into him inside." The bearded man gestured toward the hostel. "Said you might appreciate some company while he finished his call." I stared at them, trying to process this. Ian had spoken to them? About me? "I'm Rowan," the clean-shaven one said, settling into the chair beside mine without invitation. "This is Callum." Callum remained standing, his presence somehow filling the space around my chair. "Mind if we sit? The stars are better from this angle." I didn't answer, but Callum took my silence as permission and pulled another chair closer. "So what brings you up here?" Rowan asked, leaning back in his chair. "My husband's idea." The words came out smaller than I intended. Callum laughed, a low sound that seemed to vibrate in the mountain air. "Spontaneous trip?" "Something like that." "We're through hiking," Rowan said. "Been on the trail for 6 days. This is our first real beds in a week." I found myself studying their faces in the dim light. They had the weathered look of people who spent time outdoors. But there was something else. A watchfulness that made me shift in my seat. "You hike often?" Callum asked. "Not anymore." I touched the rim of my cup. "Used to, before marriage, before everything got so—" "Routine?" Rowan suggested. The word hung between us like a challenge. I looked toward the hostel windows, searching for Ian's silhouette, but saw only golden light spilling onto the deck. "He seems like the type who plans everything," Callum said. "How would you know that?" "Just a feeling." He stood and moved behind my chair. Some people are controllers, others are more... His hand settled on my shoulder. Spontaneous. I should have moved away, should have made some excuse and gone inside. Instead, I sat perfectly still as his thumb traced the edge of my collarbone through the blanket. "The sky's incredible up here," Rowan said softly. "Makes you feel like anything could happen." Callum's other hand found the back of my neck. "Like you could be anyone." The stars seemed brighter suddenly, the air thinner. I closed my eyes and let them guide me. Time moved differently under that sky. Minutes or hours passed, I couldn't tell which. The blanket had fallen to the deck, and the night air kissed my skin. Rowan's laugh mixed with the sound of wind through pine trees. Callum's hands were sure, gentle, reverent. I lost myself in sensation and starlight, in the feeling of being desired rather than simply possessed. When footsteps approached from inside the hostel, I barely had time to pull the blanket around myself before Ian appeared in the doorway. "Laura?" His voice carried no surprise, no anger, just quiet observation. Rowan and Callum stepped back, but not hurriedly. They moved with the same easy confidence they'd shown all evening. "Finished your call?" I asked, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Ian walked closer, his eyes taking in the scene, my disheveled hair, the men flanking my chair, the keycard he'd given me now lying forgotten on the small table between us. "Yes," he said simply. He picked up the keycard and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you for keeping her company." Callum nodded. "Our pleasure." "Have a good night," Rowan added, shouldering his pack. They disappeared into the darkness beyond the porch lights, leaving Ian and me alone under the vast sky. Ian extended his hand to me. "Ready to go in?" I stared at his palm for a long moment before taking it. His fingers were warm, familiar, but something had shifted between us. Some invisible line had been crossed. "Sometimes the sky speaks more than we do," he said quietly as we walked toward the door. I squeezed his hand, unsure whether his words were forgiveness or something else entirely. I woke to sunlight streaming through thin curtains and the sound of Ian moving quietly around the room. He was already dressed, sitting in the small chair by the window with his laptop balanced on his knees. "What time is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse from sleep. "Early, 7:30. He didn't look up from the screen. "Coffee's in the thermos if you want some." I sat up, pulling the sheet around myself. The thermos sat on the nightstand, steam rising from its open mouth. Ian must have refilled it while I slept. A small kindness that felt enormous in the morning light. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "Some." His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Had some emails to handle?" I poured coffee into the thermos cap and cradled it between my palms. The liquid was strong, bitter, nothing like the chamomile tea from the night before. Ian. His name felt strange on my tongue. "About last night? What about it?" He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You knew?" It wasn't a question. He closed the laptop and set it aside. "I suspected." "Suspected what?" "That you needed something I wasn't giving you." He stood and walked to the window, his back to me. "That maybe we both did." I set down the coffee, my hands trembling slightly. "So you what? Arranged it?" "I mentioned to them that my wife might enjoy the view." His shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "What happened after that was your choice." The words hit me like cold water. "My choice." "Yes?" "And you're okay with that?" He turned to face me then, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty, vulnerability, maybe even fear. I don't know yet. We packed in silence, moving around each other with the choreographed precision of a long marriage. Ian folded clothes while I gathered toiletries. Neither of us mentioned checkout time or the drive home. "There's something else," he said as I zipped my bag closed. I looked up. "What?" I was behind the door. The whole time. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood about the night before. "What do you mean?" "The business call ended 20 minutes after I left you on the porch." He sat on the edge of the bed, the blanket from last night folded neatly beside him. "I came back and saw you with them." "And you stayed?" "I watched." His voice was barely above a whisper. I couldn't look away. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, shame, and something else I couldn't name. "Ian, you were beautiful," he said, cutting me off, "alive in a way I haven't seen in years." And I realized. He picked up the blanket, running his fingers along its edge. I realized I'd forgotten how to see you that way. "So, this was what, some kind of test?" "No." He shook his head. "It was me trying to give you something I thought you needed, and maybe trying to figure out what I needed too." I stared at him, this man I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, trying to reconcile the Ian I knew with the one who had orchestrated last night. "What do you need?" I asked. He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than they had the day before. "I need to know if we can find our way back to each other." The drive down the mountain was different from the climb up. Ian's hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, and I found myself watching the way sunlight caught the wedding ring he'd worn for 8 years. "We can't pretend it didn't happen," I said as we reached the valley floor. "I don't want to pretend." He glanced at me, then back at the road. "But we need to decide what it means." "What do you think it means?" "I think it means we've been sleepwalking." He pulled over at a scenic overlook and turned off the engine. Both of us. Below us, the valley stretched green and gold in the morning light. Other cars passed on the highway, their occupants living their own complicated lives. "I used to feel like I was disappearing," I said, "like I was becoming invisible even to myself." "I know, I felt it too." He unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face me. "That's why I brought you up there. I thought maybe if I shook things up. You thought watching me with other men would fix us? I thought reminding you that you're desirable might remind me why I fell in love with you in the first place." The honesty in his voice was startling. I'd grown so used to our careful conversations, our polite avoidance of difficult topics. "And did it?" "Yes." He reached for my hand. "But it also showed me how much distance we've let grow between us." I looked down at our joined hands, his pale from too much time indoors, mine bearing a faint tan line where my wedding ring usually sat. "So where do we go from here? Where do we go from—" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to go back to sleepwalking." We didn't go straight home. Instead, Ian drove to the small cafe where we'd had our first date 9 years ago. The same red vinyl booths, the same faded photographs of local landmarks on the walls. "I've been thinking about couples therapy," he said over coffee that tasted nothing like the mountain brew from the thermos. "Therapy." I repeated the word, testing how it felt. "Dr. Chen. Sarah recommended her after she and Mike went through their rough patch." I stirred sugar into my cup, watching the crystals dissolve. What would we tell her? The truth. That we've been living parallel lives instead of a shared one. And last night? Ian was quiet for a long moment. "That too, if you're comfortable with it." The keycard from the hostel sat on the table between us. He'd placed it there when we ordered, like evidence in a trial neither of us wanted to have. "People will know," I said. "If we start therapy, people will assume we're having problems." We are having problems. The simple statement hung between us. No softening, no euphemisms, just truth. My sister's going to ask questions, I said. Let her ask. Your mother will have opinions. She always does. Ian picked up the key card and turned it over in his hands. The question is whether we care more about what other people think or about saving our marriage. I looked around the cafe, at the elderly couple sharing a newspaper, at the young mother feeding her toddler pieces of muffin, at the businessman typing on his phone while his coffee grew cold. All of them living their own versions of love, compromise, and disappointment. Dr. Chen, I said, when would we start? Ian's smile was small but real. I'll call her this afternoon. Our house looked smaller when we returned, as if the mountain had shifted our perspective on everything. Ian carried our bag inside while I stood in the driveway, noting details I'd stopped seeing. The way the mailbox tilted slightly to the left, the crack in the front walkway that had been there for 2 years. Mail's piled up, Ian called from the front door. I followed him inside, breathing in the familiar scent of our lives. Coffee grounds in the disposal, the lavender sachets I kept in the linen closet, the faint smell of Ian's cologne lingering in the entryway. Everything was exactly as we'd left it 24 hours ago. Everything was completely different. Ian sorted through bills and catalogs while I unpacked our bag. The clothes we'd worn on the mountain felt like costumes from another life. Laura, Ian said from the kitchen, come look at this. I found him standing at the sink, staring out the window at our backyard. The vegetable garden I'd planted in spring had grown wild in our absence, tomatoes heavy on their vines, cucumber plants sprawling beyond their designated rows. When's the last time we sat out there together? He asked. I tried to remember. Memorial Day, maybe? When your parents visited? That was 3 months ago. We stood side by side, looking at our own neglected paradise. The patio furniture was dusty, the umbrella table covered with fallen leaves from the oak tree that shaded half the yard. I used to love that garden, I said. You still could. We could. The correction felt important. We could love it together. Ian nodded, still looking out the window. Dr. Chen's office called back. She has an opening Thursday at 4. That's fast. Cancellation. He turned to face me. We don't have to go if you're not ready. I thought about the woman I'd been on the mountain, bold, alive, unafraid. I wanted to be her again, but not just for strangers in the dark. I'm ready, I said. Thursday came sooner than expected. I changed clothes 3 times before settling on a blue dress that Ian had complimented years ago. He wore the shirt I'd bought him for his birthday, small gestures toward the people we used to be. Dr. Chen's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, all warm wood and soft lighting. She was younger than I'd expected, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. What brings you here? She asked after we'd settled onto the couch. Ian and I looked at each other. We'd rehearsed this moment during the drive, but now the words felt inadequate. We've been married 8 years, I began, and somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other. Stopped connecting, Ian added. We became roommates instead of partners. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes on her yellow pad. When did you first notice this distance? Gradually, I said. Then all at once. There was an incident last weekend, Ian said quietly. A situation that made us both realize how far we'd drifted. Would you like to tell me about it? I felt my cheeks warm, but Ian's hand found mine and squeezed gently. We went to the mountains, I said, and I made some choices that surprised us both. Dr. Chen's expression didn't change. What kind of choices? I was unfaithful, I said, the words coming out in a rush. But Ian knew He facilitated it. I see. Dr. Chen set down her pen. And how are you both feeling about that now? Confused, Ian said. Guilty, I added. But also more awake than I've felt in years. That's not uncommon, Dr. Chen said. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us what we've been missing in our relationships. 6 weeks later, I was repotting herbs on the back patio when Ian came home from work. He loosened his tie and sat beside me on the wooden bench we'd bought the weekend after our first therapy session. How was Dr. Chen today? He asked. Good, hard, but good. I brushed soil from my hands. She thinks we're making progress. What do you think? I looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes were deeper than they'd been on the mountain, but there was something lighter in his expression. We'd been doing the work Dr. Chen assigned, talking without distractions, scheduling time together, learning to see each other again. I think we're different people than we were 2 months ago, I said. Better different or just different? Both, maybe. I leaned back against the bench. More honest different. The sky above us was the same blue as the mountain night, but softer somehow. Domestic. We'd learned to find beauty in ordinary evenings, in conversations that went deeper than schedules and grocery lists. I got an email today, Ian said. From the hostel. They're offering a return visitor discount. Thinking of going back? Maybe. Someday. When we're ready. I understood what he meant. The mountain had shown us who we could be when we stepped outside our careful boundaries. But we were learning to be those people here too, in our own backyard, under our own sky. The tomatoes are finally ripening, I said, pointing toward the garden. We should make that sauce you used to love. Together? Together. The word held weight now, earned through weeks of difficult conversations and small revelations. We were no longer the couple who'd driven up that mountain road in silence. We weren't the same people who'd return the next morning either. We were something new, scarred but honest, uncertain but committed to the work of loving each other with eyes wide open. The stars would come out soon, but for now, the fading daylight was enough. Sarah reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt both familiar and entirely new. The callus on her ring finger had softened since she'd stopped wearing her wedding band for those 3 weeks in October, a detail I'd noticed but never mentioned. Now the ring was back, but it sat differently somehow, less like a symbol of obligation and more like a choice she made each morning. Do you remember what you said to me that first night back? She asked, her voice carrying the particular quietness that meant she was about to share something important. I did remember, though I wasn't sure which part she meant. That night had been full of careful words, tentative touches, the strange formality of two people learning to be intimate again. Remind me, you said you didn't want to go back to who we were before. That scared me then. She turned to face me fully, the porch light casting gentle shadows across her features. I thought you meant you didn't want the marriage we'd built. All those years of inside jokes and shared routines and knowing exactly how the other person takes their coffee. And now? Now I think you meant you didn't want the silence, the assumption that love could run on autopilot. She paused, studying our joined hands. You were right. We can't go back, but we can take the good parts forward. A car passed on the street below, its headlights sweeping across our neighbor's garden, where the last of the tomatoes hung heavy on neglected vines. Mrs. Chen would harvest them tomorrow, probably, before the first real frost. She'd been tending that garden for 15 years, through seasons of plenty and seasons of loss, adjusting her methods but never giving up on the hope of something growing. I've been thinking about therapy, Sarah said, the words coming out in a rush as if she'd been holding them back all evening. Not couples therapy, just for me. There are things I need to understand about myself, about why I pulled away when you needed me most. The admission hung between us, vulnerable and brave. 6 months ago, Sarah would have suggested we simply try harder, work it out together, rely on the strength of our commitment to carry us through. This acknowledgement that some work required individual courage felt like another small revolution. I think that's good, I said, meaning it. I've been considering it too, actually. Dr. Martinez mentioned someone when we had that last session. We sat quietly for a while, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. Lights came on in windows across the street, revealing glimpses of other lives. A family gathered around a dinner table, someone washing dishes at a kitchen sink, the blue flicker of a television in a living room. All of us in our separate houses, working out the daily puzzle of being human together. I love you, Sarah said eventually, and the words carried weight they hadn't held in years. Not the automatic exchange we'd fallen into, spoken out of habit at the end of phone calls or before sleep, but something deliberate and considered. I love you, and I want to learn how to do it better. I love you too, I replied, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest like something solid and warm. And I want to learn with you. The first stars appeared as we sat there, not the dramatic revelation of wilderness skies, but the gentle emergence of light through suburban haze. Enough to remind us that some things endure, that beauty persists even in ordinary places, even after difficult seasons. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight we had this: 2 people choosing each other again, not from desperate need, but from something steadier and more sustaining. Hope, maybe. Or simply the quiet faith that love could be both fragile and resilient, both work and gift.